Consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to Gurus, Tony and Scott. And we have a special guest today, Keith McCormick. Keith has been consulting and training in machine learning and predictive modeling applications since the early 90s. He has a wealth of experience in mentoring organizations to successfully apply analytics and has served as keynote and moderator at international conferences focused on practitioners as well as leadership. So we're thrilled to have Keith join us today in the Q&A. So each question you submit will receive multiple perspectives. We do have a few coming in now, but there's room for a few more until the bottom of the half hour here. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Tony, Scott, Keith, or myself to respond. Let's jump right in and start with Tracy. Tracy asks, what data mining tools would you suggest that might work for a school district? I would start off by saying, we'll get to tools in a moment, but if you're looking at tools, I would say, you must be on Chapter 5 already, because in most analytic applications, we want to start upstream from the tool. We want to assess many aspects that relate to a successful analytic project. You probably picked up a lot of that from Tony's presentation. There's a lot to do with assessing your resources, assessing the leadership's objectives. Let's learn about the environment so we don't have to do retrofitting. And a lot of the information that you'll amass from doing a more comprehensive assessment is going to help guide the nature of the tool that you would use. Now, when it comes into education, when it comes to tools, there may be a first stage that you want to look at, and oftentimes you'd be surprised at how capable open source tools are in helping organizations, say, take a swing at a pilot project. They're very capable. And then later downstream, when you're standing this up more at the practice level, it may make sense to then investigate if the investment in commercial software is worthwhile. And again, the assessment can shed light on a lot of that. So that's my quick take on data mining tools. Now, what's more fitting for a school district? Let me take that out to our panelists. Let's get started with Scott initially. Scott, what advice do you have for Tracy?
Well, I'd echo and underscore everything that you've said so far, Eric. If I get specific, I definitely would go with the open source tools first. There's two particular varieties. One variety is simpler to use. It's what we call the more flow or object-oriented tools like KNIME, Weka, RapidMiner, and then at the top of the pile in the terms of the open source, you've got R and you've got Python. So those are the open source, probably the most common open source tools that are being used. In terms of the commercial tools, SAS and SPSS have been around a long time, and they tend to be at the top of the pile there, but they're expensive.
Yeah, good point. And Tony, if you'd like to expand, and you're always welcome to redirect to something that's related, but not, directly hitting the question, where I started out suggesting that, we have considerations upstream. And I know it's very natural for most people to start in with data and software when looking at an analytic project, but that's part of what we're here to reveal to them. So any related advice you may have for Tracy, where she's looking at investigating predictive analytics and data mining within her school district. And Tony, I saw you in the chat saying that you had potentially some audio issues. I see you're still tied in. Looking back here at the chat panel, didn't see anything further, but I know you were having audio issues, and my panel is showing you detached from audio at present. So we'll come back to you, let you perhaps dial back in, and let's throw this over to Keith.
Hi. Yeah, what I'd like to mention first is definitely underscore what you've already heard about doing the assessment phase first. And then I want to echo what Scott mentioned as well. When you think about the open source, you can kind of put R and Python in one category and things like KNIME and RapidMiner in another. As Scott pointed out, KNIME and RapidMiner are going to give you a graphical user interface. Will give you a little bit of a helping hand. So the real challenge with something like R is so powerful that you can do almost everything, but you're going to have to plan on a little bit of a learning curve. So one way to revisit all of that is to say that who's going to be doing the work, what time they have for professional development, and what potential budget you have is all part of that assess step. So what a lot of folks do is they make the software acquisition step one, and it really shouldn't be. It should be after that assess step.
Great advice. Thank you, Keith. And I like to switch up the order a little bit, so I'm going to come back to you first with the next question. This comes from Brian. What advice do you have to get a new data mining department up and running? Now, to me, that's different than the project level or the modeling level. This is more about standing up, a thriving residual practice. And I know that Keith has a wealth of experience, as we all do, with the cross-industry standard process for data mining. TMA's 6-phase is, a derivation or modernization of that. But for those of you that would want to access the CRISP model, and we'll include a link to that in our follow-up email. I think Keith will probably, I don't mean to lead you here, Keith, but you'll probably be focusing on the first 2 stages of CRISP and going through an exhaustive business understanding and data understanding stage to get a solid understanding of the organization's makeup, the resources, the leadership objectives, and the like. What other advice can you give, Keith, in about, for those that want to stand up an analytic department and get it up and running?
Well, in my experience, usually, this question comes up all the time. And as you know, Eric, we've had a conversation about this recently, and I've had a conversation with at least 2 others just in the last week. I mean, literally just in the last week on this topic. I think there's a number of things that prompt a question like this. I think, generally speaking, you want to stay focused on your first project success before you get too far along in trying to define a team. In my experience, I've had a lot of client relationships where the folks that played the most important role in that first project success end up thinking that this kind of work might be 1 day a week, or even they might think it's just going to be a couple days a month. And then next thing you know, it's their full-time role, and you jump your time machine and go forward 24 months, and you truly do have a team of 3 to 5 folks doing this kind of thing. But I don't think you necessarily have to start with a plan to do that. I think you want to get that first project success first. So the trick is then, who is that first team member going to be? And I think a lot of times folks sometimes get, depending on their backgrounds, get a tad intimidated by the statistics piece and think, gosh, that's the piece that maybe we don't have on the team. That's the piece that we have to address first. And somebody with stat skills, as valuable as those skills might be, all of us on the panel obviously have to know our stats to do what we do. But if you let yourself get intimidated by that skill set, then what you're going to do is you're going to bring somebody in primarily because they've got that skill set on their resume. And for other reasons, they might not be the ideal choice. So I think you have to go through that assess step, which in data mining would be very similar to the business understanding phase, and plan that first project success and find out what skills might be lacking from the team. And the stats piece might not be the only piece or the most important piece. So there's a lot to that question, but I think that kind of starts the conversation.
Well, it does, and congrats to you for being able to encapsulate it like that. I can speak for more than an hour on that topic alone. But as we transition over to Scott for his perspective on this, I'd agree with you that so many organizations now are so wrapped up in that data scientist role or label that they are assuming that they need to pad their bench with perhaps a number of mathematically oriented or PhD level statisticians in order to succeed on their first modeling project. And as we take it to Scott, I'd argue that, boy, if we focus too much, and Tony really alluded to this in his segment, if we focus too much under the hood and optimizing, how fast the engine's going to go, how fast the car can drive, we're going to miss understanding the rules of the race and what direction do we need to drive the car. If it's 40% off course, you can be going a third, faster than the other car, and you're still going to lose the race. So having somebody that I think has the business acumen and can speak to numerous people involved in either contributing to or benefiting from the end analytic product is far more critical to the success of the overall project than ensuring that we have a greater, slightly greater R squared, like I say, that Tony really pounded in his his part of the segment. Scott, additional words of wisdom around this. And Scott, I apologize. I had a little bit of echo, so I might have muted you. This might be, I did. My apologies, Scott. You are now unmuted.
Okay, guys. What I would do is I'd basically encapsulate what both of you have already said, and I'd summarize it all in 2 words: cost, benefit. There has to be a benefit to what you're investing. So to elaborate on what Keith has already said, you don't have to go out and build a huge database environment first. You don't have to hire tons of staff. You may even want to have somebody who's in charge of the development part of it, and you may want to outsource first and prove do a proof of concept. Doesn't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily hire a whole staff of people. But what you do need to do in order to survive and be successful in the business is there needs to be a cost benefit to what you're doing. So that's a general principle. Each organization is different in terms of what resources they already have and what resources they can utilize. So if you use that as your guiding principle, you'll be able to step down the path. You don't have to build a database. You can do data extracts until you can cost justify taking the next step. The biggest mistake that I've run into in my career is that, for example, back in the 1980s, you'd hear people talk about database marketing. You'd have executives in companies who'd say, well, gee, they've got one, I want one too. We're seeing the same thing happening again today with big data. People are going out and they're making big investments in it, and then after the fact saying, how do I use it? That's exactly the wrong way to do it.
Exactly. That's right. And if they had asked that question, they may have seen that predictive analytics is the part that can get their lunch money back that big data stole.
Yes.
So, all right. And let's move on to the last question. And I apologize, Scott. I'm going to mute you again because I'm still getting a little bit of echo here. I've got to remember to undo that when we come back to you. By the way, Tony, it looks like we're still not reconnected to your audio. If I see that light turn green, by all means, I'm going to circle over to you. KC, as our last question here, came in with the final question for today. I'm a master's student in data science and business analytics. What advice or words of wisdom could you provide as I start a career in this field next January? I'm always greedy with this question, these questions, and I typically go first. So I'm going to refrain and go over straight to Keith. What advice do you have to KC for getting started in predictive analytics after his education, or her?
Well, it's that's a kind of a tricky and interesting question because we can all remember, those of us that are on the panel here can all remember not that many years ago. I mean, as few as 5, there was no formal training in this area. I mean, obviously, the skill sets you could get training in, but there weren't official degrees. So I think the market is still evolving in what to expect from grads like this. I guess one caution I would issue is that some organizations in the marketplace are so hungry for this skill set, and that's a good thing, that they, again, do jump in and they make this first hire basically be practice lead, doing all that stat stuff. They throw a lot of stuff at that first hire. So I think one of the things that I would be doing is make sure that the folks that I was interviewing with weren't potentially making the mistake that we were just talking about in response to the last question. In other words, how do you start a team or how do you start a practice, and potentially not doing the assess step, not thinking things through, and then guess what? That first hire, if indeed someone's filling a position where they are the first member of this team, they suddenly get stuck with the fact that an assess phase hasn't been done. And of course, that doesn't mean that you don't want to offer your services to that organization. But I would, if I was the one that was doing the interview, I would be impressed with someone that was brave enough to ask a couple of tough, gently phrased questions around that area. So that I would want to be playing a very real role in defining my role, because many organizations that are looking for someone with this skill set don't know what to look for and don't know how to describe the position. So I would be ready for that.
Well, that's great advice, Keith, is to come in with those definitions already at hand, and that's one great advantage that candidates have, is that there's a very low threshold of what organizations actually know internally of what they need and what they want, and those two are often very different. If you come in with some structure, and even to be able to define those roles and express where you fit within them and do not try to be all of them, then I think you're really going to stand out amongst all the other candidates who are largely focused on showing their analytic muscle, and that's not necessarily what's going to take them very far unless they're simply going to play in that practitioner role. So let's head over to Scott. I've got you unmuted. What would you like to add for Casey as far as, when Casey wraps up the degree, ready to head out, how do you get started in this field?
I would take a slightly different perspective. If you're going to go into business, there's a fork in the road that leads down two separate paths. They're not mutually exclusive paths. One is, do you want to be a race car mechanic, or meaning do you want to design software and develop algorithms? And the other one is, do you want to be a race car driver? In other words, you want to be a practitioner of the art and science of data mining, data science, predictive analytics, whatever it's being called today. I'm assuming the latter is true in your case. If the latter is true in your case, then nothing will get a prospective employer's attention better than focusing on the business aspect of it. It is true that data mining and predictive analytics and data science involves data, of course. It is true that it involves algorithms, of course, but those things, especially the algorithms, are just tools. So if you approach the profession as being a problem solver who is skilled at using the tools to solve problems, then you're not only going to perk up some ears, but you're going to be incredibly successful. All too often I see people who are more enamored with the mystique of the algorithms, ascribing them with some kind of mystical properties. They're not. They're just tools. It's the way that you're able to use the tools to solve business problems that matters.
Great advice. I think you both nailed it. And in keeping with that, I would say that candidates that, even if you want to serve in the practitioner role, that's fine. A little more competitive, I think. But if you can have some of your view on the strategic components, not that you're going to work there, but that you ask the kind of questions that relate to the business application, that relate to the KPIs, to establishing the metrics by which model performance will be measured, that's going to put you far ahead of the game. And if you look at some of the other roles that were expressed in Tony's team slide, and understand which of those you would play within and be able to describe those well, you'll be far ahead of the game. But it's really the soft skills that I find in our industry are what's lacking. If you can hone some of those, if you naturally have some of them, and that's a bigger case. Many people just, especially in the analytics field, don't have a natural capacity for soft skills. But if you have that, or you can hone it further, the more you have those soft skills to be able to speak among different team members, almost switch your language, like I was saying in the introduction, to engage more effectively with the different players around the team, that's when that pool of candidates gets a lot smaller, and that's when you're going to look a lot more attractive to an organization. And of course, I think the one other thing that we could have mentioned was around apprenticeship. If it is difficult to land that first opportunity, is to, like with many other jobs, start in at the apprentice level and get some project work under your belt that you can reference and make that more appealing. But I think that's secondary to really understanding how to define yourself and look at the soft skills that will really set you apart. And at about 12:35, we'd better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments, and of course Scott and Keith and Tony. I'm sorry we weren't able to connect to your audio there for your contribution. So we'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope that you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. And make sure to act quickly to secure one of the 2 last spaces at the 25% discount for the upcoming Washington, D.C. production. If that timing or location doesn't work for you, keep the Toronto event in mind for August, and don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or a travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor like Scott, Keith, or Tony, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, Tony, and Keith, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.